Hello everyone, rather peculiar Q&A today, referring to some criticism I received concerning my last video the day before yesterday's video about the wars of the Second Lombard League, right? As you know, I've been doing these videos from a while, focusing essentially on the military history of these events. It's essentially not quite a regional series per se, could overlap with Lombardy, but I treat it mostly as a standalone war, set of wars, as we've seen, and there are similar examples like the other recent video that I made on the Great Saxon Revolt in the 11th century. I think this video can be interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, to see how I handle comments in general, not much criticism per se, but explaining how fundamentally like historical comments, right, and criticism should have some concrete foundations, if anything, in things that I discuss in the video. I'm out here in the open, right? However, I manage comments, which I think in most cases are not, there's not much that they're not worth being read, right, by others, but probably are counterproductive for the sake of the video's understanding. And in this video, I've made very few videos about this, including a pretty big trilogy that was a back and forth with a guy who also thanked me in the end. I granted that comment, whose, in fact, comments I did not approve on my channel, but I made entire videos on to prove, like in this very video itself, by the way, that I'm also pretty limpid regarding anything that comes close to some actual historical criticism. And this comment was very interesting in a sense, meaning that as bizarrely as possible, in the sense that, as we will see now, we will be reading the entire comment. It is particularly long, admittedly 3/4 of it is just sort of repeating itself, and sort of beating a dead horse in my opinion, but essentially claiming that I would have presented the aforementioned video's topic through a misleading lens, and not really, at the end of the day, bringing up any evidence from my same text, whose script is, by the way, pretty much out there, again, in the open. You can paste and copy it, you can do whatever you like with that. Building, instead, up on a set of notions that not just I did not express, even remotely in the video, but that I actually expressed in the very opposite sense that this person is claiming. So actually making even some of these person's points that are historically correct, but that are inexplicably understood as me not having fundamentally wanted to present the diametrical opposite of what they are saying, and even going actually a fairly broader length with that, without mentioning that since he presents himself as a long date follower, which I think I recognize also for the reason we'll explain now, makes it all the more sort of enigmatic in the sense that if you follow me from such a long time, years as a matter of fact, you should know that I made actually a lot of videos discussing the very things that this person claims that fundamentally would have been omitted from this video, that I would have presented in the opposite way, in which I actually and explicitly and sort of not unambiguously and macroscopically did in the same video. So as always, this has always surprised me a big deal. I remember when I started Schwerpunkt, my first thought was like, I'm posting all this stuff publicly, and I will be talking a lot of sort of political, historical, cultural issues. It's going to be plenty of criticism, right? I expect this storm of attacks or whatever, and instead, literally no historical criticism has ever arrived to my channel. Anyone who expressed a dislike, an idiosyncrasy towards the channel was fundamentally disliking me or the specific beliefs I hold, or that they, especially, this is not new at all, they presume that I do without even understanding them. This is not much today's video that is truly odd in so many different ways. But still, again, very, very instructive in some others. And the more time passed, the more I realized that, in this sense, history, and this is also true of my professional activity, is actually more like a psychological inquiry, right? It's not much. People do not really approach history because they are interested in getting things right most of the time. What they care about is getting what essentially they feel or whatever crosses their mind. Like if you want to be sort of historically accurate, correct, you should sort of put emotions aside and being a bit more rational. If anything, basing yourself especially on the evidence provided, and not sort of taking off on a tangent about something that truly, like, nobody has ever even entailed or suggested or remotely sort of brought up, right? And so this is also my proof of how and why I do not tolerate, for example, this pretty long, I pasted in comment, the comment is like here on Word, 1.5 pages. Again, 3/4 of it is basically the same thing. And the rest is actually circling around the fact that he himself does not actually even claim that I would have done, he doesn't explain what I would have allegedly said. He ends up claiming that of all of this, papyrus, basically, that the entire point is that he thinks that I may have interpreted it in a way or not. And as you will understand, also dialectically speaking, it's a bit complicated to even understand the positive, probably the purpose of this of this comment. But I wanted to take it seriously because I think that a long date follower that is presenting also some actual historical facts that I largely say, aside from the way they are presented, I do not dispute, nor I've never disputed on Schwerpunkt, and you have over 3,000 videos with hundreds of hours on the very topics that here this person is discussing. You can absolutely see confirmed, right? I will now enter in the matter. I would like also to say this is going to be a historical but also historiographical video. I will post also in the comments, not just the topics comment usually dedicated to, in fact, the videos that are very much pertaining to this one, including the very topics that I decided to show you, to show this person, if anything, that I covered, because he may not be aware at this point of the same. But also some explicit quotes that I extrapolated from 3 distinct books from the top expert on the subject that this critic invoked in his own comment. And that, spoiler, but you have to arrive at the end of the video for this, actually contradict what he was actually saying, and or is literally presenting the opposite perspective that this guy is coming from. Because again, he also praises me in a way, so we have to explain what's it's very difficult to get in somebody else's head, but it's something that I'm very interested in for some reason at this point, because I think it can be helpful for him or for anyone to see how eventually, and there's going to be some final remarks, conclusions on this, how easily distorted things like sort of claims, historical, like even simple listening comprehension, like most of this comment would be completely useless if the person had at least wanted, I don't know if he did it on purpose or not, to recognize that I literally said these things in the video that, unequivocally contradict what he claims I would have done, basically. At the same time, we will also consider how such information somehow can spread for free, because if you put the stuff everywhere online, like some AI can be fed on it, and AI is dumb. If you ask them things, like, it doesn't actually quite tries either to balance out perspectives or doesn't actually get into the core of the matter, right? And I think that these videos are important because they show what kind of autonomous criticism from the both of us in this case does work like. And I think it's also an interesting way to look at sources. You're gonna to finally get some bibliography that you lament that I don't put anywhere, but if you follow my videos, you actually do know that I base them on sort of pretty substantial sum of primary, secondary sources that I actually explicitate, right? So this thing has gone this is not what I've been accused of. This has nothing to do with it, because most people who follow me on a regular basis are completely fine with it, as a matter of fact. But let's basically get directly to the comment. And let's also do this without any kind of acrimony, because actually there are some pretty heavy claims about me. So this idea of having misled or whatever, I don't take this personally. I mean, I think it's just whichever the reasons that we're trying to understand here behind the comment are, can fundamentally explain it. We will also repeat what I've done in the video. Again, it's just the other day's video about the wars of the Second Lombard League. Pretty long video, by the way, with a very specific structure, with a very specific purpose, and also pretty plain in its own sort of structure and general explanation. So nothing particularly controversial. With all the things that I upload about, I don't know, religion, spirituality, tradition, whatever, those are much more controversial thing. I never get this kind of disagreement, just some disgruntled liberal or people that feel threatened by the empire. Actually, this critic goes much the opposite direction in this case, and it's partially funny. We will see now. It sounds pretty heavy. So he starts. I will simply read the commentary. There wasn't anything else surrounding it. It says, quote, "This is the first time I generally disagree with a Schwerpunkt overall take, ... And as much as I greatly respect his work, as generally one of the very few in-depth historical content on YouTube, this video, this is the bad part begins, suffers a deep constitutional flow of heavy hindsight around Frederick that runs throughout." Right? So as you will see now, his point is that I would have a deterministic outlook on the fact that Frederick would have basically not been able to win over the Lombard League, and or that the Hohenstaufen house would have basically collapsed in the following decades, and with them sort of their general power, their ecumenic ambitions together with the empire and so on. So the first note of method, if you know anything about my work, right, if you look at my strategic analysis, if you look at my Clausewitzian series, etc., you should know that I am completely alien, right, opposed to, completely strange to the, first of all, the what if side of the story that is not taken by the critic, but that would have been projected on me, or in the sense that, you know, I would give any war for granted in outcome at a given point, right? I've done this, you can see it in the series about Ukraine, you've seen it in many other videos, that my entire point is agency, right? So it's moral forces, and I explicitly say in all these, as much as I actually said in this very video about the wars of the Second Lombard League, that if any war is fought, it's because there is a substantial chance for either side to actually win, right? Both for the offender, the defender. This is a deep Clausewitzian concept. So the entire idea that I basically would have to be given for granted the fact that the Hohenstaufen had to lose, but that is completely strange to my actual method of strategic analysis, right? So this just set matters dialectically, but you see how far this runs, right? Because at some point it surprises you. It says it provokes a good, and this is the worst part, frankly, and if you, and this is, again, I say it without any bitterness, whatever, I don't care, forgive this person, like I will not publish his comments, but I will make an entire video, like in this case, for that matter. The reason why I don't publish these comments is that if people have this erroneous understanding of what they're listening here, if you give them this comment under 2 hours and a half long video on the, they're going to read that and they're going to skip the video. They're going to think that somebody else said that. They have no idea of the authority involved. There is some Easter egg, by the way, at the end of the video, concerning also my proximity to some of the scholars that this guy cites, by the way. But it's also setting the, it's a bold claim. It heightens the stakes by saying here that, I literally say, it provokes a good deal of misleading notions around the overall fortunes of the Hohenstaufen and Frederick's position at death, right? Now, of course, like every historian can say something wrong, but say you have, once you make this claim, it's like, again, you go, we'll see in the end, that the very authors that you mention allegedly backing your point are actually saying something very different and aligned with what I'm saying in the video. And we'll explain now even what misunderstanding is, because half of this is misunderstanding what I said, and another half is literally me never having said the rest, right? So it's incredibly strange in a sense. And I would add this too, that I actually remember this guy. I didn't remember the avatar. I remember the avatar, but I didn't connect it with a comment that I think I received. In fact, on the same type of video, I think it was the one of the older manualistic ones that I made about the Frederick II's policy in the second half of his, up to his death, basically. And so it fits exactly this overall context, in fact. That, I don't remember the comment because I think I didn't allow it, in fact, and that basically gets dissolved after a month and a half or something, automatically by YouTube. That said, the same exact thing. And then I remembered. I said, this is the same guy who literally years ago wrote me basically the same identical thing. I don't remember this guy for any other comment. Normally, I have a good memory. I tend to remember more or less the most habitual users that comment, that say anything meaningful. This person may have watched me for a long time, but literally intervened. I could check actually through the analytics, but it's not so important. Only basically to stress this very specific point, right, that he just expounded. As it provoked a good deal of misleading notions around the overall fortunes of the Hohenstaufen and Frederick's position at death. So this guy is particularly attentive to the very last years of Frederick's life, where he argues, and it is actually true, that by that point, there had been some minor coming backs, some victories of the Imperial armies in the broader Italian theater during the struggle, in fact, broadly speaking, against the papacy, against the Lombard League, and so on. So, which I even discuss. In fact, he, as we'll see now later, says basically, well, you don't even mention that. I literally mentioned the Battle of Cingo. He says, we'll see later, right? He literally says, he doesn't say what was happening in 1250. I literally said, the Imperial army was winning and beyond, but I'm not spoiling. Let's do it by step by step, because this it doesn't stop at 1250. It goes on for decades, and I literally, of all the things I didn't have the time to cover, the only ones I actually covered outside of the topic of the wars, the specific wars of the Lombard League, was exactly the very things that he claims that I'm not saying. And not this one. This is just the details. It was the smallest one. There is all the continuation, Montaperti, Manfred, Cassano d'Adda, Izzolino, and so on. So we will see. This is somehow unbelievable to an extent, right? As we will see, first of all, two things. The video I made, and I reiterated it multiple times, covered exclusively, because this is what I do, the military history of the wars of the Lombard League. So at the beginning of the video, I made this disclaimer and said, look, this is just the incredibly concentrated, because it's a big deal of military history. In 2 hours and a half, it's too few anyhow, but only of the war between the Second Lombard League and Frederick II. So basically, any other army, say another communal army, was not part of the League, or even the war that was happening with the papacy, I did not cover. And I said, by the way, you have other videos on this, right? I have the videos about, for example, the siege of Rome. I said I will not talk about the siege of Viterbo, for example. There are lots of other clashes. I mentioned Cingoli and so on. So this was completely together with, I don't know, the papal invasion of Sicily during Frederick's crusades. I literally mentioned them all in the video by saying, look, we're not going to cover that. At some point, as I want, by the way, we're going to make a military biography of Frederick II. I don't need to say explicitly that I'm fairly well acquainted, not just with the history, but the historiography on the subject. I could tell you many, university stories about this, and we'll partially get to something pretty close to that in the end. But this is the strange thing. Like, there is a final consideration about the overall failure of Frederick II to subdue the Lombard League, which is sort of the macroscopic and uncontrovertible sort of outcome at Frederick's death that indeed was happening at a time that, as you know, happened very, very suddenly, all right? And things could have gone on under him. There is no doubt that the King of Sicily suffered a heavy blow, and this is consistent with the very citations from the same expert that he says that allegedly says the opposite. Everything. So what he's saying here, that everything was, if not 100% okay, it doesn't even admit that there was a blow of some sort, because the narrative is, this is literally how crazy it goes. It says, the Kingdom of Sicily did not collapse. Germany did not collapse. And whoever even claimed such a thing, like, before reading this comment, I honestly had never even conceptualized an idea of this kind. Not just I don't say anything like that, but not even remotely, not even by, you misinterpreted that. This is not a thing. No historian ever claimed such a thing. There was never any, the history of Frederick II was known as studied as soon as he was there. Like, there aren't many doubts about what happened. And literally that there was this incredible relative rigging toward a direction that was absolute in ways that I don't even realize how could be supported, especially being, these are things that you learn in sort of the first year of university. It's not secret, special knowledge. Why would have, Sicily crumbled because of what was happening? As we'll see now, it actually took a pretty heavy blow. There was a pretty serious financial crisis. The soldiers did not want to go because there weren't enough funds. This is all, we will leave it for the citation that are pretty explicit in the end, in 3 distinct books of the same top scholar on the subject that this guy invokes himself. And so I would have become someone who, according to this guy, thought or had ever said or conceived, and I would like to stress with, at this point, I think, if not hundreds, but several tens, and therefore hundreds of hours of videos on the Hohenstaufen, on the post-Frederick II, on, again, Manfred, on what happened in Germany, and as if, by the way, this was something difficult to find, right? If you claim that I literally said something like the Holy Roman Empire collapsed because Frederick II died, or the Kingdom of Sicily collapsed because Frederick II died, you have to prove that not just I, but anybody ever claimed such a thing. And I have, again, 3,000 public history videos on YouTube. There is plenty of, you can run this with AI, like you can ask all the questions, you can listen to all the videos, and I dare you find any single instance in which anybody would have even suggested such a thing, which is used as a counterpoint to, in fact, a position that does not exist. So it's basically a fictitious straw man that eventually ends up like saying, oh, I don't know, I think that maybe Schwerpunkt thinks that he reads this in a different way. We'll see now what it is, because it's nuanced in some ways, but it's actually incredibly simplistic and superficial in others. But it's sort of striking that, especially if you praise my work, you say I'm one of the most in-depth sources on YouTube, and you think to have like some knowledge on this. You didn't even listen to my video where I actually claim the very opposite and digress on the very continuation of Hohenstaufen power after Frederick's death, let alone the fact that I actually published multiple works on these very subjects. Part of my doctoral thesis, for example, about Manfred German mercenaries employed in Tuscany. I have I think a 2.5 hours long video about the Battle of Montaperti. I made videos again about Ezzelino da Romano. I made videos about Manfred. I explained there how hegemonic at that point Ghibellinism, like this secular German force, was at some point on the peninsula, tendentially so. For this very reason, we should also understand what because this is conjectural, because he does not explicitate that, right? He doesn't like somehow the fact that either the fact that I claimed that the fact at the end the Lombard League won the war, right? If anything, if Frederick wanted to subjugate the Lombard League, he failed, right? There is no doubt, as we will see now, in the case that, I don't know, the Ghibellines remained, both in northern Italy, in other places, and that there was a continuous struggle of the Swabians. Again, I challenge anyone to find anywhere, not just in this video, but literally in every other single video on the Swabians, on the Hohenstaufen wealth of Ghibellines, that I ever claimed something to the contrary, as I spent literal hours describing in detail, I don't know, Frederick of Antioch's role in Florence, for example. Like, this is the level. If you are invoking some scholars that you miscite, right, just be aware that you're talking to one and you're doing the same very thing with that, right? I don't claim that my YouTube work is my professional work, never made that mistake, nor pretend that people to simply understand the difference between reliability and accuracy, which is apparently very complicated for some. This is not perhaps the case. But again, if you want to claim that I mislead people and you present a strawman argument that is based on something that is literally the opposite of what both the video and the rest, all the rest of my work, and as a consequence of my background, basically shows, then there is a big problem, right? And this will brutally emerge as I'm going to read the citations that you can already read in the comment, as I probably already dropped it in their entirety. So he says, nevertheless, it's a very well-considered video and deserves as much consideration in return. So any reading, please forgive the long glut of a comment. So, of course, I'm fully willing to forgive you for any of this. But again, it's also strange that first you say that, you know, I have this misleading idea, and this is a fundamentally rigged analysis of the world, but that my video is still somehow well considered, meaning how much this is also what I really wonder, like, say, how much does all this sort of alleged misunderstanding, sort of misleading interpretation of the world affect the whole video? Because the video is literally the clash between Frederick II with the Lombard League. So if you think that I thought, and from here on, he doesn't actually much explain what's wrong with this video, that there is something strategically inconsistent about it. Say, what are we even talking about? Like, why did you choose did you watch it entirely? Because the first thing that came to my mind when I read this statement, did you actually read the literal references to all the continuation of Hohenstaufen power? It was a big deal as well. We talk about Conrad IV, no mention. And I actually added that very thing because I repeated myself like 3-4 times in that video saying we don't have time to cover everything. I have a limit of 2.5 hours per video. We can't fit everything. And the only very things that I decided to put forth on top of the strict military, you know, that I followed. This series is strictly about the campaigns, the battles. It's all about that. I actually, for the sake of context, gave you what happened afterwards in terms of the continuation of imperial power and attempts at subjugating the papacy, the Guelph Alliance, and so on. This is extremely strange, right? Extremely strange. Or you can also digitally search if you don't want to listen to the whole video. Admittedly, the generated subtitles on which the automatic scripts are based may be bad for, especially looking at, in this case, Italian names, searching specific topics. But again, I presume, here I see the guy posted this comment some hours after I published the video, so I presume that he had plenty of time, at least if not plenty, he had the mathematical time to watch the entire video, right? And it's sort of difficult to presume that somebody who has this massive, as he called it, glut, whatever it was, of a glut of a comment, long glut, didn't think this true or did recognize such a disastrous pattern in my video in order to state things that are actually not even said in the video, and that are actually even said in the opposite sense of which one he's saying. Now he says the situation reading from the comment, the situation of Frederick II's death is block not the anatomy of a defeated ruler or a disintegrating dynasty. how or why, right? You know, first of all, he had, as we will see now, I will cite the very scholar on this, because if there was any doubt about, say, you can be doubtful about, I don't know, how you consider a military victory or defeat. I'm the first person, I said it in so many videos, that military and defeat are relative to the contended, right? So you had all the chance to discuss whether this was in the sort of broader ecumenic dimension of this clash, etc., what kind of, how this can be considered in the sum of wars, of a fort, whatever. Was this sort of a defeat, by which degree, all right? But this was failure, right? And a pretty high cost, as we will see now, and as we explain in the video. And it says, or a disintegrating dynasty. Well, there was a little problem, right? You had Conrad in Germany, where he was dealing with rebellions. We'll see. You know the story. The guy knows the story. You had Manfred that was illegitimate. There was friction between the two. As we'll see now, scholars literally say, as it happened, that the South also plunged into a civil war. The death of someone like Frederick alone is a heavy blow in any case. So it was definitely not such an easy situation. Heinz imprisoned in Bologna. This is says the situation of Frederick's death is not, capital letters, the anatomy of a defeated ruler or disintegrating dynasty. This is at least historically debatable, but this is not even what the point of the comment is. We'll see now. It actually takes off in unexpectedly bizarre ways. It says, it is a vast political system under extraordinary pressure that nevertheless remained territorially rooted, administratively coherent, militarily active, and capable of recovery across several theaters at once. Question that I will repeat perhaps 300 times reading this. Where in any part of my video or in any other 3,000 parts of my videos I ever stated something against this? Now, I want to know, because this is the literal reason, this is the literal straw man argument that you're making. You're going as far as countering this straw man that you didn't dare, in fact, even cite anywhere in my video, because I never said it. This is literally an idea that I never even thought of until today. That this was not a vast political system under extraordinary pressure, nevertheless remained territorially rooted, administratively coherent, military active, and capable of recovery across several theaters at once. Where is, in the freaking video, any hint of this? Right, where? This is what I would really like to know. I made an entire series on the Kingdom of Sicily, several hours, looking at all the dynasties from the Hauteville to the Hohenstaufen to the Anjou to the Aragonese. I have entire videos dedicated literally to the institutional history of the Sicilian kingdom. I made videos about its juridical, its legal administrative system. I even said in the same video, as I always say it whenever I talk about the kingdom of Sicily, this was by far the best administered country in the Latin Germanic West as a whole realm, as whole kingdom. Right here, we should say, by the way, there are all mitigating factors actually that back sort of my idea that things were gradually sort of going downhill. I mean, it's not really good what happened during Frederick's crusade with the papal invasion, major rebellions. It was not really good what happened to the Kingdom of Sicily with Markfeld of Anweiler or Otto's invasion when Frederick was a minor. Like, there was the death of Henry VI, also the wars of Henry VI with the Sicilian vassal rebel had not really sort of strengthened that much the general wall of the system that was surely very effective and very advanced, but was also incredibly difficult to control in many ways, like any power at the time, admittedly, but especially as big as this one, right? So I would like to spoiler a little bit where this comment goes. Basically, now, this is literally 3/4 of the same repeated thing all over again till the end that nobody ever remotely hinted at throughout the entire work of Schwerpunkt. Nor that I know any historiographical theory ever did, right? So this guy goes on, exceeding from the other side, claiming basically that at the end of Frederick's life, things were fully successful, right? Or even if he doesn't say fully successful, he never actually suggests that was something wrong. It was just like, no, this thing recovered me. Like, whoever even said, like literally in my video, I didn't even say You actually had to make me re-find the pieces in the books of the scholar that you mentioned to actually show something that I hadn't said in the video. Admittedly, the very fact that the kingdom had taken a very heavy blow, that there was an internal crisis, and this was definitely not a joke, that the Lombard victories had definitely inflicted the whole system a pretty heavy blow, that this system was starting to feel heavily fatigued by. And this is something that I didn't say, for example, in the video, that you made me sort of giving me the chance of actually pointing out. Right. By the way, I would like to stress, and we'll see it better later, that there are studies by the very same scholar Grillo that you mentioned that actually show that Frederick II's army was actually not so functional to begin with compared to the communal ones. Right. This is literally the greatest expert that we both recognize in the field as literally and explicitly saying this stuff. Also, I would like to stress, I know Grillo in person, he knows my work, I know his work. I have pictures with a guy, that he's not particularly well disposed towards the imperial cause. I mean, he's an impartial historian, he's neutral, he's objective, correct. He may sympathize with the empire, I don't know, but, this is a guy who makes it pretty clear in his books as well, including the one on the wars of the First Lombard League, that there was a pretty... in this sense, the Lombard victory was something more than just a stroke of fortune. He's generally very sympathetic, right, to the cause. Not least perhaps because he's a Milanese himself. He teaches at the University of Milan. But also because, of course, he points out something that I agree with, by the way, that the general beating that the imperial forces took at the hands of the Lombards on multiple occasions with mixed results, there is no doubt about this, actually did undermine the sort of the Sicilian system at that point without collapsing it. Where is it in any history book or anything I ever uploaded that the system collapsed? Right? Indicate any single passage in the video that claims that Germany collapsed or Sicily collapsed because the Lombards fenced off Frederick's invasions and subjugation. And this is not just like a shade of it, because as we'll see now, he keeps insisting that literally let's say every single social political structure continued. Like, he's not saying, well, he took a blow, whatever. He's literally countering the idea that the entire social structure of the empire or Sicily collapsed for some reason. I'm not kidding. I mean, he's actually serious about this. We'll get back also to the whole thing of the Ghibellines, etc. That's also not much of a point because, of course, like the Ghibellines were just Ghibelline on their own. Even when the Imperials already eclipsed itself and or the Sicilians were not the capacity of hegemonizing up to central Italy together with the empire, but also in the times of actual Angevin hegemony, and that it's not much just a sort of German or Sicilian thing, as a matter of fact. The guy, as we'll see now, puts a lot of emphasis, especially on southern Italy. I don't know here, I don't want to add anything, say, trying to guess where this guy's from or whatever. I don't mind, but my impression is that he's trying to somehow overtly rehabilitate either the General Hohenstaufen coast, but not much, mostly just the Sicilian kingdom and reach, etc. And nobody denies that it was incredibly powerful. But here, all this tirade about how everything was recovered and there was nothing bad that had basically occurred, or that had no problem was occurring in 1250, but when Frederick died, is actually historically false, right? It's not supported by historiography, as we will clearly see, and it is also very much pretty soundly available historical and historiographical knowledge, in fact. He goes on and says, speaking here mostly about the kingdom of Sicily, if I'm not wrong. Well, no, he's talking about the wall, I think. He says, in any case, a system that over the course of 1250 was making substantial recoveries and gains, which go almost totally unmentioned here. I would add, first of all, I mentioned them. Literally, 1250, I said the Battle of Cingoli. That not just I actually mentioned, but it's not even part of the wars of the Lombard League. Right, I said it explicitly also in the video pretty clearly, and this is also basic knowledge. If I make a video about the wars of the Lombard League, and I'm saying at the very beginning of the video pretty clearly, because I'm also very aware of all the rest of military history was occurring all across the rest of central southern Italy, I said, this is just Lombard League. I will not talk about, again, Cingoli, Viterbo, Rome, about which I even made content already. Like, the question is, why are you even bringing that up? Right? There are the factions to the north, we will see now, but those also happen exactly because Frederick was not really finding himself in such a terrific situation. And there is some sort of smoothing of the corners that he makes to make this ideal picture of actually the system was recovering. I don't know, it doesn't even explain why they didn't go forward then, right? With Frederick's death, etc. Like, somebody could simply manipulate it in the other direction as well, right? It says a system that over the course of 1250 was making, okay, with respect that omission, I literally talked about the Battle of Cingoli, which is also a minor reality. I mean, it's part of the marches of the Papal States. The video deliberately does not talk about it. And by the way, my consideration on the outcome of the war, exactly because I didn't have time either, weren't even that long. I didn't stop saying, oh my God, you see, Frederick could never win about the Lombard League. This was a distraction, the end of it. There's none of that, right? And in many other videos that in which I actually discussed these very topics, I also never claimed that. Simply because I know the history. I publish on that history. I don't know if you understand that. I am not quite a specialist in the 50s and the 60s, but starting from the 80s. And I did publish stuff on the 50s and the 60s as well, right? And just saying. It says, with respect that, and this is the use of words as well tells everything. With respect that omission breaks the central thesis. What central thesis? And because you don't even articulate it yourself, you're just saying what? That this system collapsed, and that I don't know, since the war, because you don't articulate it yourself, that at the end of the war, tides were reversing. No, they weren't reversing. Things were going pretty badly systemically, right? A victory here and there on the outskirts, far from the north, is not a victorious war, right? Also factional, switching, a city passing from the wealth to the buildings. This depends also on local affairs, and in part also because the overpower of the League at some point was over much of a burden also for some communes as well. They decided at that point not to make it expand further, right? He said, so what central thesis? It's not the central thesis, it's not the central thesis of my video. It doesn't have, it's not expressed as a thesis anywhere in the video. The point of the video is to recount the military history of the wars of the Lombard League from beginning to end. There is not a central thesis to this, let alone one revolving around the fact that there weren't any other wars or attempts of imperial expansion. I literally talk about Cingoli. I literally talk about the revival of the last years. What is here the central thesis of what? Right? This video does not have a thesis per se. The only thesis is mostly how the war was fought, how certain battles played an important role in the history of the art. That's the many centers, so to say, of the whole video. There's no central thesis that has anything to do with what you're claiming. Actually, I'm stating the exact opposite in the video. So please re-listen to the video because you didn't listen to it. I have to sue because I don't think you're dumb. All right, so let's be honest about this. This is a joke and a waste of time. For if it wasn't, in fact, so useful to show how easily people can mischaracterize somebody's work, right? It says Parma destroyed Vittoria and Fossalta, removed Enzo, but and Fossalta removed Enzo, but neither dissolved the imperial coalition resting upon Cremona, Pavia, Modena, Reggio, Piacenza, and the powerful Veronese, Byzantine, Paduan bloc under Ezzelino. And so what's the point of this? Does my video say that there weren't Ghibellines in the Po Valley at the time of Frederick's death? I literally go on talking about up to 1259 regarding Ezzelino, the Battle of Cassano d'Adda. How is anything of what you're saying here bringing anything to your point? who are you talking to, right? Are you talking to an imaginary straw man? Are you writing this just because you want to show us that you know this? Or what is the point? What does this have to do with me misleading people? Is there any part of the video in which I claim, the Lombard League cleared every Ghibelline from out there? I remember saying, Ezzelino da Romano was a very powerful lord in the Trevisan Mark that you're talking about here that continued and went on and on. I made multiple videos on that as well. So it's very strange. Like, as I said before, as I was anticipating, there was never a moment, and I made literal hundreds of videos about Italian communes, in which there was no Ghibelline nor Guelph, right? Not even in the moment of greatest Angevin hegemony over Italy, that actually succeeded differently from the Siculo-German one. The Siculo-Angevin, you can prefer, versus the Siculo-German one. There was no Ghibelline, right? The same goes here, like with the fact that these other cities were Ghibelline. I talk about Modena. Notoriously, I talked profusely about Cremona, and I didn't even sort of say anything regarding, I don't know, these places fail at some point or were clear. But what are you talking about? I mean, seriously, what actually are you talking about? This would be extremely interesting to know. It says, Piacenza entered the Imperial camp. By the way, this stuff is true. Again, I have nothing against this. This is totally normal, right? I understand that he's trying to drive a point home, but again, he's doing so by a premise that I misled everybody, but saying something that I literally and explicitly said. Very clearly, by the way, not en passant or randomly so, but purposely. Exactly because it's a big deal what happened with Ezzelino to begin with. It's a very famous parabola. And one worth noticing, I like very much Ezzelino, as a matter of fact. So, by the way, I also tendentially have Ghibelline sympathies, but I also through my studies, understood what was the point of the Guelph and how it is often sort of ideologically, especially the Ghibelline side of the story, is ideologically mischaracterized as the more simply traditional ones. It's a much more complicated story, telling the truth. It says, Pallavicino expanded around Cremona and Western Emilia. Well, I personally published something about, I don't want to say which one of these communes, that exactly deals also with the Pallavicino's expansion right throughout this, the second half of the 13th century. So, frankly, again, I don't know. What would you want to do about this? The Ghibellines, he says, secured much of Tuscany. Despite Florentine factionalism, well, Grillo has something to tell you about this, telling the truth. And you have to wait a little bit before things also smile more clearly to the Ghibellines in Tuscany, and also for just a certain amount of time. Since Capraia fell, well, it's great, strategic event. Tuscany supplied fresh levies, and so on. Frederick could even leave northern Italy for the south because he judged the regional command structure sufficiently secure under his legates and allied lords. Well, what did he have to do? He had just to stay there. Of course, these cities remained in Ghibelline hand. What this had to do with the fact that Frederick had failed against the Lombard League, and when he died, his domains had pretty suffered from the war. The situation was much worse than before, and actually went worse before it got better, right, in the 50s. Before Manfred reestablished something that was more cohesively, and that they had to sweat, by the way, a lot before to be fully recognized, first with his half-brother arrival, as they also mentioned in the video, that also his nephew, whose title he usurped. I also discussed this stuff a pretty substantial length on Schwerpunkt. I don't understand what are we even talking about here. It says, the losses of 1248-49 altered commanders and local balances, but they did not produce the cascading defections presented here. Which cascading defections? Because you have to be factual. Which cascading defections? Right, the 1248-49 losses were pretty severe, right? And your Grillo will say that things were going pretty badly, literally, right? Translated from Italian, just freshly today. So, the idea that here, cascading, because he's trying to presume or to portray this idea that, according to me, everything was collapsing, because now he will escalate by saying Sicily did not collapse. Germany did not collapse. Why would they have collapsed, actually? They weren't faring that well, telling the truth, but it's not like countries or kingdoms collapsed just because they had lost a war. The imperial scale, these were some of the most powerful units in Europe. Like, it's very rare to find something like a kingdom that sort of is destroyed throughout all the battles and wars. This was a pretty heavy beating, and it wasn't such a good, positive thing, telling the truth. Do you want to reverse it because of what? Because of Cingoli? Because a city shifted from Guelph to Ghibelline, because of also internal strife. What is the point? It's missing the entire picture. By the way, there is also another dialectical aspect here. In my video, I stressed that trying to take on the Lombard League as literally the single most advanced part of Europe was of a universal ambition that only, in fact, an ecumenically scaled power like the one that Frederick wielded could have attempted, right? So I'm not even saying like, these were, I don't know, either of the two powers were fundamentally weak and it had to collapse because of that. I don't know how you see medieval warfare. What should have happened according to you? In my mind, that somebody believes that if they lost a war, I don't know, a kingdom from another part in another region of Europe collapses just because they had lost a couple of battles. It doesn't matter how important they were. I think I made enough medieval warfare videos for people to have an idea of how these things fundamentally work. Then he says, the situation remained fluid, with constantly shifting loyalties rather than a deterministic march away from imperial suzerainty. And I will ask again, where is this stated in any of my videos? Not just in the video you're talking about. Where is it stated in any of my videos? Can you please tell me where this is said? Because I don't believe in determinism. It's a category that does not apply in my worldview, in my philosophy, my strategic analysis. It's not a thing, right? Why do you think that we need to hear that the situation remained fluid, which sounds some sort of generic relative, blanket to hide the fact that, yes, this was a pretty low point, right? There were some coming backs here and there, but that definitely does not account for a systemic revival of imperial power at the scale necessary or to tackle the Second Lombard League, the papacy, and in general to reactivate a type of offensive of the kind we've seen in the previous years with the campaigns of Cortenuova, of Parma, and so on. This is important because it's not like the war was over, but conventionally, even if I didn't know the political context here, when you take those losses, normally, right, it's a bit difficult to relaunch the system, right? It's very difficult. Like, if you are on the offensive, you have to make a gigantic effort, and I don't doubt that Frederick, Stupor Mundi, was capable of surprising us with coming backs, with sort of renewed struggle that was definitely going on, and there were surely some imperial victories that did occur. But again, in the broader picture, what is your conclusion here? And especially, where did anybody see anything different here? Where in my video anything of the kind of a deterministic march away from imperial suzerainty I read here is expressed or even alluded to in any remote sense? This is, I would really like to know. It says, it was very much up for grabs and Frederick had done much grabbing. Okay, what does this actually mean? This is just superfluous. And it says, Paulo Grillo's work on this period demonstrates this rather well. Oh, does it? Let's cite Paulo Grillo. So I have the comments down below, so for public knowledge. Excerpts from the works of Paulo Grillo on the final years and death of Frederick II. This is from L'Aquila e il Giglio, 1266, La Battaglia di Benevento, from Rome, Salerno, publishing 2015, chapter 1, paragraph 1. On December the 13th, 1250, at Castel Fiorentino in Apulia, Frederick II of Swabia, king of Sicily and emperor, died on the threshold of 56 years of age. The passing of the great sovereign came at the culmination of a period of growing difficulties for the crown, right? The Kingdom of Sicily was exhausted by the fiscal pressure aimed at financing the sovereign's military campaigns against the communes of northern Italy. Right, Grillo, by the way, if you don't know who he is, like he's a cat, he published an enormity of stuff. He's exactly that sort of prototype of top continental scholar that literally knows the nit and grit of every, it's not just study, he's the cool guy who studies military history just for, he arrived that collaterally. He's the guy that studies, I don't know, even the financial registers of the tax collection of the Milanese commune, or tells you, how woods were managed in the Lombard country. Like this kind of person, right, with massive experience, archive experience, that wrote single-handedly and simply entire books on, say, the first word of the Lombard League, little thing, says, I repeat it, the passing of the great sovereign came at the culmination of a period of growing difficulties for the crown. The Kingdom of Sicily was exhausted by the fiscal pressure aimed at financing the sovereign's military campaigns against the communes of northern Italy. These campaigns, moreover, had ended very badly, so that in the last 2 years, Frederick had to witness the loss of important cities like Parma, Como, and Modena, by the way, that you're mentioning, just as we mentioned it for Fossalta, when they took a beating, by the way. It says, all of which passed to the opposing camp. So what do you want to do? Do you want to count how many points the other squad scored? How do you evaluate historical, political, moral, cultural, strategic events? And endure the loss of the entire royal treasury in the disastrous Battle of Vittoria near Parma. This is a detail, for example, I did not add in the video. The court was there, so they also lost imperial treasure, as a matter of fact. But as well as the capture of his son Enzo by the Bolognese in the defeat at Fossalta on May 24, 1249. Throughout the Dominion, from south to north, impulses of revolt were simmering, which in October 1250 culminated in Florence with the insurrection of the so-called First People, this is the Primo Popolo, and the expulsion of the Imperial biker. And I made also an entire video about that, for that matter. I have an entire series on Florence that discusses this profusely. 2. On the military strain and financial exhaustion of the Swabian army. This is from Grillo's Cavalieri e Popoli in Armi, le istituzioni militari nell'Italia medievale, Rome, La Terza, 2008, chapter 8, paragraph 1. Quote, the new dimensions of war imposed by Frederick were such, however, that the royal coffers themselves ended up finding themselves in difficulty. In the 1240s, from all the multiple fronts on which the Swabian troops were engaged, from Lazio, from Lombardy, from Sardinia, equal complaints arrived from unpaid knights and foot soldiers who pawned their arms, deserted, or explicitly threatened to go over to the enemy. At his death, which occurred on December 13, 1250, the emperor was witnessing the failure of his hegemonic design. I will stress this. You mentioned Grillo. Say this was not the end of anything. Grillo literally states the emperor, this death, was witnessing the failure of his hegemonic design. The hope of forcing northern Italy to accept his rule had by now dissolved. The hope of forcing northern Italy to accept his rule had by now dissolved in the face of the tenacious resistance of the cities and the by then unsustainable weight of the wars unleashed to bend them. The by then unsustainable weight of the wars unleashed to bend them. On the succession crisis and Manfred's rise to power, source, Grillo, Guerre ed Eserciti nel Medioevo, Il Mulino 2018, chapter 2, paragraph 3, in this work he's citing himself, by the way, and so you can find the supporting the original, the context originally detailed in his own work, La resistenza delle città italiane agli assedi di Federico II di Svevia, 1237-1250, Tattiche e politiche scelte identitarie, Società in Storia number 157, 2012, pages 407, 428. I have the other two books in digital, all these three books in digital, so I can mention you the paragraphs, but not exactly which page they are in the actual printed work. And here it says, quote, the death of Frederick in December 1250 and that of his only legitimate heir Conrad IV in May 1254, which I also mentioned in the video, by the way, as he made a campaign, as you know, in Italy, so proving that I know, because now he comes up with Conrad, the critic. It says, Conrad did not fully, I literally said in the video that he invaded Italy. Everybody knows that, by the way. Grillo says, the death of Frederick and that of his only legitimate heir Conrad plunged the kingdom of Sicily into chaos, right? He doesn't touch on this lightly, right? He doesn't say, well, yes, but I would, for example, express myself in different terms. He's more tranchant. He literally says, plunged the kingdom of Sicily into chaos. And he goes on, he says, from a 5-year period of civil war in which the claims of Conrad IV's namesake son called Conradin of Frederick's illegitimate son Manfred and of the popes confronted one another. Manfred ultimately emerged as the victor, being crowned King of Sicily on August 11, 1258. Decisive for Manfred's success was the recruitment of hundreds of German mercenary knights already in the service of Conrad IV and the Saracens of Lucera, who transferred to him the loyalty when they owed to his father. On these two forces, the new king based his army in the following years as well, given that his system of power, hear this, founded on the assignment of the principal government roles to his closest family members, did not allow him to trust either the feudal aristocracy of the Mezzogiorno or even less so the cities, right? So, given that you mentioned Grillo, you may want to check what he says in 3 distinct books as the definitive outlook on what was happening in 1250, right? So, definitely, it doesn't seem to me that, as you say, it was very much up for grabs, and Frederick had done much grabbing. Paulo Grillo's work on this period demonstrates this rather well. Well, I think that you have not, you've read Grillo's opinion on this as much as you have listened to my video. And I think that this suffices, right? But he goes on. He says, most strikingly, and here's talking the critic, where is the broad imperial recovery of 1250 in the last year of Frederick's life? I talk about the Battle of Cingoli, and you heard what Grillo had to say about 1250. The situation sucked, right? If you're trying to rehabilitate for some reason, Ghibellinism, imperial power, whatever, it's your business. I don't care. I don't know why you want to do it. I am myself very much, romantically looking up to Frederick II. I don't really have a negative bias towards him, but I'm also a PhD specializing in 13th, 14th century Holy Roman Imperial warfare. I looked at this stuff pretty thoroughly throughout my decades of studying, and it doesn't seem to me that you're really grasping the actual overall taking that I make, and that I fundamentally criticize myself just for being too relatively balanced, right? Not having something more firm to say, like Grillo has, for example, exactly to avoid that there can be comments like this when people hear something and they maximize, I don't know, they go down a rabbit hole that I don't even know how it is ignited, because they want to, in this case, magnify whichever was the situation of 1250. And he says, without seriously engaging with that recovery, the conclusion inevitably reads later on Stauffen defeat backwards into a strategic situation that had in several crucial aspects already turned back in Frederick's favor. This is even wrong in the merit of the logic of it, because first of all, as I repeatedly said, and you can watch the entire video and the many others that I made on this subject, I went on explaining, as any medievalist does, right, and how you examine students at university on this extent, that Ghibelline power continued, right? It's not like what happened in 1250, even as a minor recovery, or as a recovery you want to term it, has actually much to do with the broader, much bigger picture, for example, Conrad's expedition, Manfred's recovery of power. It's not like you cross that out and that power could not reactivate itself. You're literally saying here that, if the recovery of 1250, before also Frederick's death in the same year, is somehow now the cornerstone of the continuation of Hohenstaufen power. And it's actually you, in this case, who is claiming that hadn't that happened, the later Hohenstaufen would have collapsed just because of that. This is insane. It doesn't make any sense. It's not history. It's not politics. It's not strategy. It's actually a self-defeating argument on the very basis of your claim that is actually historically correct and that nobody countered, that later Hohenstaufen power did continue. Even without what you hear, you're somehow specifically focused on it. And I would like to stress that the previous video, the previous comment that this guy's made on that old video years ago was literally fixating exactly on this last year's, right? This comment, for example, expands more on the later period, but it's also relatively less relevant to him actually to talk about the rest. And now we will see how, because it doesn't actually add much to the conversation at all. That's why I found this comment so striking. It says, beneath the military network stood something much more substantial than the loose collection of Ghibelline clients implied here. Where is it implied? So I would really like to know. I'm talking literally about the Sicilian army of Frederick II plus the Ghibelline forces. And the German reinforcements, I talk about them. So beneath the military network stood something much more substantial, loose collection of Ghibelline clients implied here. And where is it actually implied in the video? Where I literally talk about also the historiography, including Grillo's, about, that is not the only one studies this thing, as you also know, regarding the Sicilian kingdom's army. We talk about the Saracens, we talk about, and he goes on actually saying this. Again, you can also check out my videos about Sicilian, Southern Italian Sicilian warfare. I have an entire playlist about that. We talk about the general development of the kingdom from a military point of view throughout all the various dominations. You may want to be careful with the claims that you make, because I honestly don't understand why you're making them. I truly believe you when you say you're an old date follower, and I truly even believe you when you express appreciation for my work. But this is what makes it all the more confusing. Why are you actually saying this? What did I imply? I don't know, this military network, you're hinting at the whole system that Frederick controlled in Europe and the Mediterranean. Is this a loose collection of Ghibelline clients implied there? Have you actually listened to the video? Like, do you know what I made an hour of introduction, 2 hours and a half video, very expressly stopping first and foremost, even before the Lombard League, on the Kingdom of Sicily. Fundamentally, I reiterate that was an incredibly powerful kingdom. There was a launching pad for all these operations. Germany was more decentralized in that. Where were you when the video was rolling, so to say? It's really surreal to read comments like these, and it tells you again how dramatically misinterpreted or misportrayed somebody's work can be online. I'm absolutely aware this happens on a regular basis, but these videos are gold because they actually are sort of revealing the entirety of the inconsistency of this, and I get more views in the process as well, consolidating my general reputation online in a world of skepticism, as a matter of fact. He says, during the 1240s, Frederick drew the Kingdom of Sicily and Imperial Italy into an increasingly connected system of government. Well, actually, as we've seen from Grillo, this seems to be exactly the opposite, right? If he had, the better hand he had was at the beginning of the war, right? So it's not like the fact that there was some general subtle development all across the system had only or fundamentally to do with the fact that the Kingdom of Sicily was more in control of Imperial Italy per se. Actually, like during the 40s, the opposite happens exactly because the Lombard League fences off most of these offensives. And this is what we're discussing in Grillo also explained to you, right? It says, Enzo became vicar for Italy. Okay, that's and a point. He got imprisoned. He's talking about the 40s, right? So again, you can't look at literally a guy that, for how important he was. In fact, as vicar for Italy, he was literally defeated and captured and imprisoned for life during the same 1240s, to stress that this was such a moment of strengthening because this guy had become vicar, right? You see the inconsistency here. It says, captains and vicars general govern territorial commands. Well, this was already the case. This was already the case throughout the whole period. There may have been some strengthening here and there in institutional forms, but again, politically, during the war, in the 40s, things toward the end went pretty worse, all right? It's not to say that, again, there couldn't be better forms of power concentration that Frederick was striving for. This is absolutely the case. But that here, again, all this litany, right, for which he starts telling us that everything worked magnificently. Says, Sicilian barons and officials were placed throughout northern and central Italy. This exactly parallels Enzo's dynamic. Like, the attempt was actually the very reason why the Lombards went at war, and when Enzo especially was captured and Frederick died, all this particular system actually declined during the 1240s in the same identical way. So again, this is just wishful thinking, like saying, well, because I decided something should happen, this is what actually happened. In the 1240s, Frederick was at war, right? He wasn't successfully imposing his rule on northern Italy, right? This is literally why we're looking at the wars of the Lombard League in this period and saying that this eventually backfired. That's why, in fact, you don't hear much success in the north. It's not like there was even much warfare going on in the north. If you have Ghibellines that are fighting against the Welfs locally, like Ezzelino, for example, that's because, again, Welfs and Ghibellines continued to do so also when, all these figures were also passed. It says Melfi housed a court of reckoning, and why wouldn't it? This was really normal at this point in history. It was mostly an internal way to administer the Kingdom of Sicily. So trained officials exercise direct supervision over justice, revenue, and military resources. Well, this is a prerogative of the Kingdom of Sicily and its particular institutional and juridical system. How does this sort of have to do with the direction of the war, and how, in this sense, is this somehow mitigating or more important? This is just thrown in, let's add something more to make the comment longer. It says, or to magnify again the regno, as we'll see now. These reforms continued through 1244 and 1247. Yes, and also because there was a hell of a military fort at stake. This is what I always say during my videos, that mostly all the greater, we've seen it also in the video about Edward III, if you want sort of more efficient army, if you want to scale things up, you must carry out a reform. You've had to find resources somewhere. And this is why Grillo says that at the end of this period, by Frederick's death, the reign was exhausted. So yes, you can do these things, and levying resources, that's what happens, right? That's how it works, in case you missed that. The result was not a modern Italian state, he says, but it was unmistakably an Italian-Sicilian administrative regime. No. Also exactly because the Lombard League had the upper hand in northern Italy throughout this period, right? This is the actual deal, right? And there wasn't an event succeed. It's even there had been prior victories, as Cortinova, etc. What happens in the 40s? It starts going quickly downhill, and it was not much of an Italian-Sicilian administrative regime, right? The Lombards were not figures somehow accustomed to be ruled by others, especially as they were with an entire army facing, right, the Imperial, and facing and defeating the Imperial one as well, all right? So in any case, you have to cross out the entire Guelph side of the story that is actively fighting against Frederick. So this is definitely not, is that there was not a modern Italian state, but there was unmistakably an Italian-Sicilian administrative regime? No, right? This was essentially an attempt at feudal restoration in the most highly civilized region in Europe. I definitely add Sicily to that, but mostly in a feudal lens. The communes had already a much more effective and efficient system of self-governance that was literally allowing to fight back against any kind of such impositions that did not take, like, this is yet another very important side of the story. Frederick, if anything, co-opted local northerners. That's how he operated, right? He stepped up a little bit, and it was an intelligent policy, but he never arrived in relative terms closer to subjugating the communes than what his grandfather had done. Right, the highest level of relative power of the German Empire, so to say, over the Lombards was in the second half of the 12th century, right? And the Lombards shook it off. At this point, it wasn't a more enforced one, right? It was just wishful thinking, for which we've seen it also with what had happened at Cremona in 1236, and that's why they went to war. Quite simply put, right? And you also know, if you know Frederick's life, that his Ghibelline followers in the north advised him against the particular atrocities that were carried out against the Welfs, because in part they were also Lombards themselves, and they sort of very much treasured their own liberty, even as they were fighting, if anything, as imperial subjects. So If anything, a Lombard would see himself as part and protagonist of the Italic kingdom, not much of a Sicilian rule, as a matter of fact. And there was a heavy cooptation of locals rather than some sort of Sicilian grafted administration, as you're depicting here, right? No doubt that Sicilian administration was very advanced, but again, you don't come to do that. There's a war in between. It's like saying that, I don't know, during the American War of Independence, the English ruled the 13 colonies. Doesn't make any sense, right? So again, no doubt about the sophistication, the advancement of these systems, the resilience of Sicily. This is never in doubt. This is just like a rosy picture that you're describing, not even of the war per se, but of how actual medieval political, institutional, administrative, legal systems actually worked, right? It didn't work like that. Most of this was standing actually to work on the basis of arms. This is also something that the same Manfred understood pretty well, right? Because again, the Kingdom of Sicily did go with all the various wars, eventually gradually disrupting its own much better administered, right, Norman, partially Swabian legacy, right? Provincial justiciars, chamberlains, he says, castellans, customs, officials, captains, podestav, vicars, and royal sons formed overlapping chains of delegated authority converging upon Frederick's court. Well, I don't know why. I don't know. The Pope of the Lombard League didn't have this. You're not claiming that. But let's say, what's the point, right? This is how kingdoms were ruled. What are you suggesting? That I, in the video, came up with any statement regarding a civilizational comparison where I claimed that there wasn't a hierarchy in the Kingdom of Sicily? What's the purpose of your statement here? Like, what does this have to do with the wars of the Lombard League? Right, other than what is normally stated in any, I don't know, manual history of law during the Middle Ages, or how normally kingdoms were governed, even in the most sophisticatedly advanced Kingdom of Sicily. But this does have to do with, did my video at any point ever claim, or any any other video, by the way, that because the Lombards won at Fossalta or at Vittoria, that the Kingdom of Sicily did not have a court and vassals and vicars. What's the point? You're mentioning podestas, captains. These were castellans. These were normally used also by the Italics, by themselves, right? That's how they ruled themselves on a regular basis, and how they ruled themselves also with a king of Italy, such as Frederick was meant to be. Why are you associating this mostly just to the Sicilian administrative system? Italy already had that, right? And also something more advanced with the communes. The podesta is literally like an external. We talk about different podestas in the video itself. Like, was already a pretty sort of advanced system pioneered by the communes per se, right? Frederick obviously adequated to the local customs. How should a heavy operate? And again, what does this have to do with war? It says, a reverse in one siege camp could not make that machineries appear, and it did not. I ask again, where is in any video of mine, or for admittedly anywhere else, probably in historiography, stated that a reverse in a siege camp could that administrative system disappear, and it did not? Where? What kind of point is this? What kind of opinion is? Who are you talking to? Right? Who in your mind? What are you imagining you're attacking here? Where's the evidence that anybody claimed any of this, or that a normal person even thinks this on a regular basis? Where is the evidence of anybody claiming anything remotely close to this? I would really like to know. It says the Regno. So Regno is, I think the guy is Italian. It's not really an issue per se, but actually I would like to obviously sympathize with the fact that he probably cares about his history, right? So he's making an effort to speak his mind, and I don't want to undermine him in this, but let's say the Regno refers to the Kingdom of Sicily, right? Because it was the capital, our Regno, because it was that big and powerful, as we have explained in the video, by the way. It says the Regno remained the immovable center of the world construction. No. Right, the Italian communes had always administrated themselves by themselves. This is the actual, like if you study any medieval history book manual, the system worked pretty well by itself. That's how they fought successfully to resist against the encroachments, moved from the Kingdom of Sicily plus lots of other territories, including Germany and the same Ghibelline Italians, by the way. So I don't understand what is, you can say that's the immovable center in the sense that it was the biggest of Frederick's possessions and the one he based himself in. Yes, as I said in the video, and as I said in many other videos. And what does this have to do with the war, the administrative system? You're not even explaining this. You're just talking to yourself here. It says no rival entered Palermo, and why would anyone want that? What did the Lombards care about Palermo? And why would have anybody in this sense even need to invade Palermo? Right? It was absolutely enough to defeat the emperor in northern Italy, as it happened. It says, no papal government replaced Frederick's officers. Well, actually, it even happened at some point when some rebels sided with the papacy during the rebellions. Frederick notoriously went sort of pretty iron-fisted with that. There's no doubt he was a hell of a ruler, and he knew how to recover these territories. But again, you're also a bit too sort of categorical regarding... You said yourself this was a fluid situation. And you know pretty darn well it was a fluid situation also in southern Italy, right? He says, Apulia, Capitanata, Calabria, and Sicily did not peel away. And why would they? Right, again, it could have technically even happened. There had already been historical rebellions of different barons, etc. There were, as we said, even during the Crusade and more. But Wood did argue for any of this to have happened. So again, where is the evidence that anybody even remotely alluded to any of this? I understand it's a punchline, but again, it's a punch in the void. It says, Lucera remained obedient. These were the Saracens, right? Castles, taxation, ports, and customs remained under royal control. Well, as long as he was in charge, yes. But again, you're not explaining why a Kingdom of Sicily should lose control over this, as it did partially under foreign invasion, when the Lombard League fenced the Frederick's attacks off. What does this have to do with the war? What this have to do with the political system? And especially Wood did claim otherwise. This is the strangest thing of this all. Honestly, this may be the strangest thing I've ever read, considering the amount of effort put into it. It says, provincial officials continued raising men, transmitting revenues and provisioning campaigns. Well, yeah, because, like any other country in Europe that was fighting wars and losing or winning them, that kept working. So, yeah. And where's the end point of this? What's the goal? Naturally, I read the entire comment previously. Sometimes I start Q&As without even... reading the whole thing, but you can immediately see from the beginning that this was some flawed idea. It says, even Peter de Lavigna's fall did not paralyze the chancery. Okay, it was definitely a sign that there was, as Grillo says, like some simmering feeling of revolt. You seem to be aware of that in general. Like, these are not good signs overall, right? It says, Frederick's government was never reducible to one minister. Its strength lay precisely in the multiplication of trained officials and institutions, and Wood did claim otherwise. Can you point to any evidence when anybody is stating something that even remotely sounds like that this wasn't the case? Where is this going? Where does it come from? People, if you want people, because this was to be displayed, like in my comment, like, and you have the chance here. You had the chance at least. Your videos, your comment is being read, right? To whom? Who are you targeting here? What's your object of criticism exactly? Because we still haven't understood that. It says, the papacy's attempt to raise revolt within the kingdom required fresh legates, privileges, agitation, and organized military intervention. Well, sure, because, it's a bit unlikely that the papacy enters alone the Kingdom of Sicily and single-handedly subjugates it. So again, how is this a relevant statement, right? How would have the papacy had to cope with a major regional power? Like how, again, who said anything against this? You should answer this question. I mean, it's obviously a rhetorical question. I think after this video, we can all conclude that there is not much to answer to this, right? But this is the point. It says, had the Regno truly been collapsing, who said that? Where in the video is anywhere in that video or in any other of my videos or in any piece of historiography that you're aware of ever stated that the Regno had been collapsing? Right? Says none of this would have been necessary. Who did say that the Kingdom of Sicily was collapsing? Where? I would like to stress that these are all rhetorical questions because we very well know that nowhere this was stated. So again, had the Regno truly been collapsing? Yeah, who said that? Again, right? You want to list name and surname. That would be really interesting. It says, Central Italy likewise remained contested rather than lost. And who said that Central Italy was lost to that? Right? Again, I would like to stress, this is a video about the wars of the Lombard League. Right? It says, Jesi briefly changed hands after Parma, but Assisi, Pesaro, and Senigallia were recovered. Oh, yes, Assisi, Pesaro, and Senigallia, this deep strategic cornerstone of the Italian peninsula. What does this have to do with the Lombard League? We're talking the marches there. If I wanted to make a military history of the marches year by year, I could do it with all the primary sources available on the subject. Why are you talking about this while arguably claiming that I have been misleading people in looking at things that you are not providing with any evidence I have ever even addressed? And when I did actually address them, I literally said that there was a recovery in the marches, such as, again, after, in fact, in 1250, the Battle of Cingoli. Right? So it says Tuscany remained a major Ghibelline reservoir, also a major wealth reservoir for that matter. Grillo before told you quite clearly, do you want me to say it again, about Florence? Where was this? It says which in October 1250 culminated in Florence. It says impulses of revolt were simmering, which in October 1250 culminated in Florence with the insurrection of the so-called First People and the expulsion of the Imperial vicar. Well, it seems that, again, this is not something you can univocally claim. Well, look at a major reservoir of that, and also, how do you see medieval Italian history? Like, at some point, all the Guelphs take over all of Italy, and all Ghibellines take over all of Italy. Even if you are creating this straw man, don't you realize how much misconceptions you're projecting on this model, right? Why would you even argument this instead of simply laughing off, presuming that you actually believe that somebody said that, which obviously nobody said that. And you're talking, by the way, to the creator that on YouTube made by far the greatest amount of historical videos on these subjects than any other put together. And I'm not kidding. We both know that this is the case. So the question is, you said at the beginning of the comment, like, this is the first time you disagree with me. So, okay, if you disagree with me only this time, you're accusing me of things that I would have allegedly done in hundreds of other videos. Indirectly so. So, again, this doesn't look very good, right? This, posturally speaking, seems pretty ambiguous and somehow even not really landing anywhere, because here, again, nobody stated these things. You, in the end, don't even accuse me fully of having done this. So why are you even talking about it? You accuse me of being misleading. So where does the misled here, right? I would really like to see, but it seems that you may be misleading others into thinking maybe that I said things that you don't have proof that I ever said, also because I would never dream of saying anything of what you're claiming. This is extremely disturbing, right? So be careful when you choose words when you talk with someone, because, again, this is YouTube. If I ever met you in person, I don't know who you are, whatever, you don't know who I am, but it's possible. The question is, you would never behave like this, and you know it very well. Like, this is a fruit of YouTube's anonymity, of some hyperbolic or emotionally loaded kind of vent or sort of misunderstanding or whatever. But this is, considering the effort you put in structuring this video, this comment, the question is, this is not simply a normal rant, right? This is something more structured. It comes from somewhere, and it would be better if you told us why that is the case, because really we do not see who you're talking to. It says, Frederick continued appointing and coordinating regional commanders, and who else should have been appointed? How do you imagine this? Like, you lose battles, and in other places that you control, you stop appointing people. What's the logic of this? Like, are you claiming that since somebody else was standing for the Ghibelline side, which again was happening autonomously, even when the kingdom of Sicily was conquered by the Angevins and the German force was at the minimum, like, that, I don't know, people should not be in charge? How do you think it worked? You're heavily underestimating, in trying to defend your position, the autonomous city-state power that existed on its own legs and that routinely saw these factional struggles besides Sicilian intervention. I never, even remotely, in any of my work, ever even beyond my work, to say what you're countering here. And so this is incredibly strange. This also says, this video treats every papal gain as cumulative, but every imperial recovery as provisional. How? How? By the way, it's not like there is a big deal of papal gain here, right? The video does not focus on the papacy, right? I talk about the Council of Lyon, I talk about the general support, but I'd say it's very secondary, right? The video focuses on the military campaigns that were largely fought, in fact, by the Lombard League, that was subsidized by the papacy, was working as a proxy of it as well. But let's say, again, how? I don't know, the fact that Frederick eventually did not manage to subjugate the Lombard League, and that essentially campaigns in the north, other than carried out by local Ghibelline communes, did not appear anymore, right? The next theater historically would have been Tuscany. It was mostly central Italy, also because of, again, the civil war that broke out in the south, etc., and Conrad's expedition, etc. So the question, right, is what is actually, in the sense, like, permanent about Frederick's attempt at subduing the Lombard League? You tried to list that. Well, the Lombard League was there and it had not been dislodged, right? The papal gains here, how are they listed even? You seem to be confusing here what I'm doing. This is not a political history. As I also made lots of different videos about the relation between Frederick II and the papacy. This is, I also talk about the siege of Rome, so if you're interested in all that, you know that I've done all this stuff. This is about the victories and defeats of the wars between the Lombard League and Frederick II, right? There is nothing really cumulative about, say, the papacy in particular. Like, they eventually managed to keep Frederick II at bay. So in the same way, Frederick, lost control of different centers of the north, since they went at war against him at some point. The question is, was much of what he did there stable, right? Aside from individual Ghibelline, even Guelph leaders co-opted as Ghibellines, in some specific communal basis that would have existed otherwise in the struggle between Guelphs and Ghibellines. It was really typical of the era. It was typical of northern Italy. It was something existing before and after Frederick, and actually intensified even after Frederick, on a local factional basis, and with, in fact, all the resources that were unlocked for not having to fight against an external invasion. The question is, again, do we see a thread of this? Do you think that my video is showing especially papal gains as opposed to military victories of the Lombard League? And which other sort of big victory did Frederick score here in the picture? I think that Grillo really explained that quite well. He literally said things had gone pretty badly, right? These campaigns in North had gone pretty bad. There's not really a political, strategical way to deny this. It's pretty typical for an offender to lose a specific gain in the moment in which he fails at the offensive, right? And the defensive succeeds. That's why the Lombard League remains sitting there, just as the papacy did. This is, in fact, again, the criticism we were hinting at before that can heavily undercut this whole position in general in a broader sort of political, international, military, and more sense, the autonomy and the liberty of the same Ghibelline rulers of northern Italy. Right? There were lots of also feudal lords, and some of these imperial vicars were hoping, of course, to be co-opted further in a feudal hierarchy and so on, but their power was foundationally communal, right? They had lots of other estates across we mentioned the Pallavicini, some of these were families that came probably from the feudal from the nobiliary background of the imperial hierarchy, but notoriously in all this, the power bases of Italy were the communes. And the communes here mostly fighting against one another for all different reasons. It wasn't about making Frederick win as somebody who would sort of lord over everybody. Actually, the fact why the situation was somehow more balanced than, for example, during the first Lombard League is exactly the fact that Frederick lacked any sufficient grasp on these city-states in order to fundamentally coalesce them only against him. This is part of the reason also why in this otherwise relatively sort of faltering offensive capacity of the Imperials, some cities decide to pass to the Ghibelline side because they realized that also the power of the League could be played at the expenses of other cities. This was completely normal. If you know how truly independent-minded and military organized the northern Italian cities were, you've seen also very well in the first war of the wars of the first Lombard League of how the same communes that had called Barbarossa ended up fighting against him when his attitude toward them became too impositive. Right, the fact that Frederick was co-opting more, it was actually a positive thing. It was actually probably why I said at the beginning of the video that pretty clearly that he could win this. Right, here we're just looking at the scene and we're saying by his death, Frederick had suffered pretty heavy defeats, and regardless of some provincial coming back, the whole picture had not fundamentally changed. Not the balance was fundamentally towards the reactivation of a major offensive could have subdued the Lombard League, right? Grillo told you called Grillo into question, so to say. Now you listen to what he says, right? Which you claimed that wasn't quite the case anyhow. In 3 distinct books, right? He's not schizophrenic, right? So we all know that what he's saying is right. And these are also pretty recent works for that matter. And so he says again, the sequence itself does not justify the asymmetry. It kind of does. Like, it wasn't 50-50, right? And evidently by that point, the Lombards had the upper hand. The fact that in relative terms there had been a coming back in some theaters doesn't mean that Frederick was better off at this point than when he was after Cortenuova, say, or even when he had started the clash, as a matter of fact. He says, Frederick repeatedly replaced defeated forces, restored communications, and reopened fronts because imperial authority continued to exist through functioning institutions and durable territorial blocks, not merely through his personal presence. Where in the video, or in any other of my videos, or in any historiographical work that you're aware of, is this stated otherwise? Where? I would really like to hear, can you point at any part of my video in which I say that basically the imperial system disappeared because Frederick died? Can you point at anywhere, even remotely suggestive of this idea, that I would reject a student during an exam for, that you are so fundamentally, you're really founding your own, you're digging deep into this, right? This is an exitless pool. Right, if you want to die, if anything, it's a more Apollonian metaphor. If you want to die on that hill, that's not quite a great hill to die on. And then he passes to Germany, and here he escalates further. He says, Germany supplies the same corrective. Corrective of what? Right? In order to correct something, the opposite of that should be stated. Can you point, again, at any evidence that it was stated otherwise? Because we didn't even talk Germany. As a matter of fact, it says, Conrad IV had not been displaced by 1250. Where in my video or in any other of my videos or in any other known historiographical work is this stated otherwise? Can you provide me with any slight, minimal, suggestive trace of evidence of the opposite? Can you provide with any evidence to back your claims? Can you point to me in which way my video is suggestive of the fact that Conrad IV had been displaced by 1250? I would really like to hear that, right? Especially as I discussed in the video his Italian expedition in 1254, right? So I would really like to know, to hear exactly how a beggar Conrad II would have launched an expedition to Italy. From my video where I would have allegedly said that Conrad IV would have been displaced by 1250. Can you point at any single shred of evidence in which any of this makes any sense, any logical sense, not even contextual sense? Then he says, William of Holland remained dependent upon the Rhenish archbishops, failed 3 times before Boppard, abandoned Frankfurt, and in 1250 was forced into retreat after Conrad relieved Boppard, advanced against Mainz, and recovered the initiative. I made videos about German history to talk about this, by the way. It says, William remained too weak even in 1251 to leave Germany for imperial coronation, and his later gains. Well, it's also kind of obvious. If I have an idea what his power basis was, you are not providing with any evidence of why anybody would have to even to think that he could simply go there, bypassing Conrad in that way, right? His later gains came only after Conrad departed for Sicily, which is not so that good of a situation in any case for a German ruler. We all know what the Edictum in Favorem Principum was about. I think that you know, right? I wrote hundreds of pages of on the Interregnum, right? And I think that you do know, right, that the Germany as such had been being truly privatized by the same Frederick II with that provision, that he invested more in Sicily than he was doing in Germany. He was trying to privatize the same Germany into some sort of general private possession, especially alongside the Alpine Arc from his Swabian possession, rather than attempting broadly concentrating German feudal monarchic power. Right, this is a major topic in Germanistics, in the history of German Middle Ages. I made an entire trilogy about princely Germany, and we addressed, of course, this transformation. Again, what does make you think exactly that any of my videos have stated otherwise? Is there any trace of evidence that my videos are saying any of this anywhere? Because I've never even thought of this. Right, this is the first time you make me conceptualize an idea that I never formed because I never studied a history that said that. And I didn't need to fabricate a fantasy scenario, which you're using as straw man that does not apply to any known history that I'm aware of. Then he says, Germany was therefore not a kingdom whose collapse merely awaited announcement. Where is this stated in any of my videos, including the ones you're criticizing, and in any other historiographical realization? Right, the sense that the Hohenstaufen had taken a blow, and that I have a higher opinion, for example, of Conrad IV. I studied his provisions in Germany. He was a pretty capable ruler, and at the time it wasn't an idea that the Hohenstaufen simply collapsed, but again, also, the situation in southern Italy showed with Manfred. So, this was not an easy or sort of positive moment in which, Sicily was intact and, everything was fine in the north, or, also in Germany. Do you realize, if you have any contextual knowledge of this period, do you realize how complicated the system was and under how much pressure, as you point out, but in this sense, how not in a positive sense? You have to reach the absolute of the nonsense to construe straw men. You have to literally claim that somebody said that Germany collapsed in 1250, that Sicily collapsed in 1250, that everything depended on Frederick and every other civilization or even peasantry collapsed because he died. That's how far you had create a straw man, just for telling you how relativistic your approach to all of this and how devoid of substance it really is. Let's not even talk about the form. It says, nor had Leon created an accomplished political reality. What is a council do you have to do? Like, from a moment to another, the entirety of Europe has to replace the rulers of Sicily. How does this work, right? How are you saying this? It's like saying today, well, still the United States has not conquered China, so yeah, well, yeah, sure. Like, we live in the world of reality, I say. It says Innocent IV still had to recruit rival kings, preach crusade, finance armies, organize legates, stimulate rebellion, search for someone capable of conquering Sicily. And why should he have not done otherwise? Can you explain to me what sense does your statement have? Right? What is the point of this? That, I don't know, people could walk freely into Sicily because Frederick had died. How does your understanding of medieval international politics or strategy or, like really, well, it's incredibly interesting, right? Also dynastically, juridic, how did it have to happen to you? What kind of straw man is this? I've never heard anything like this. It's utter nonsense. It says, Frederick remained emperor because no one had removed him. And why would he have been removed, as he was one of the most powerful rulers at the time? And yes, he had failed in subduing the Lombard League. That was also subsidized by the papacy. That was also a power that also Frederick, for that matter, could not displace. So again, what's the term of comparison here? What are we doing? Seriously, what kind of logic or reason is there in these statements? It's incredibly difficult to make a point. Like, if you wrote this, if you had to submit statements like this in a peer-reviewed journal, or even if you went over to a, like, people would look at you in a sinister way, say, what is this guy on? Right? It's not really an argument. I would like to stress this. Maybe you have been carried away. Believe me, I'm sort of pretty concentrated on this because it seems to me like a mental delirium. Like, it's a claustrophobic labyrinth of completely foundationless state. Historically, like, your point of claiming any of this originating from any of my videos is equivalent to an hallucinogenic trip, right? I hope that you're well. I don't doubt that you're well, but let's say whichever reason brought you to write this thing is incredibly strange. Like, it's either incredibly specific and I can't see it. Maybe you have a great love for Frederick II. Maybe you think that the fact, I don't know, that of course he had his rule had setbacks, weaknesses, and nobody ever claimed that he was done for. Right? Nowhere in the video this was claimed. Like, this would be enough to throw all of this away. So again, it would be also interesting. I don't expect any answer, because also I will not answer to something like this. It's already too much. It's too insane, right, to be treated seriously. But let's be honest, right? This is not normal, right? It says Conrad remained king because no rival had displaced him. And so I don't understand what's the term of comparison in this. Who said that Conrad would have to be removed because Frederick lost at Parma, or Enzo was captured at Fossalta? What's the logical connection between these two events? Who stated anything? Can you point at any shred of evidence surrounding this topic at all, of any of your attemptively logical architecture in this? Like, what's the point of all this? It says, Sicily remained Hohenstaufen because no papal candidate possessed it. Well, they captured it in less than 20 years, for that matter. So, even Abulafia, Sturner, and Huben show how deeply rooted Frederick's regime remained and how firm the Regno continued to be. Well, it seems to me that Grillo answered you there. Not just... he talks profusely about that because he really knows his deal about it. He wrote a lot about Manfred, and there could be more about this, but Manfred's rule was very much hanging, right, as most sovereigns rule, on a pretty thin thread, right? There was a great issue with Conrad that voices say that he actually assassinated, differently from the voices claiming there's a wealth propaganda that he assassinated his own father. Indeed, what happened there between the two was pretty shady. As Grillo said, given that you're keeping it now to cite him, he did not trust his own vassals. He did not trust the communes, and he notoriously also harnesses like an army of German mercenaries rather than a feudally organized, hyper-centrally administrated, whatever you're trying to describe here, kingdom, because the kingdom had been heavily worn out by war's expenses. So it says, more recently, Fulvio Dodone has reinforced much of this picture alongside Paolo Grillo. Yes, Paolo Grillo, that, as we've seen, says the diametric opposite of what you're claiming. You're trying to create false strawmen, also putting words in other people's mouth that do not support, as we have clearly seen in 3 distinct books written by this unequivocally on the very topic, on the very part that we are assessing here, that this was not the case, right? That there was a pretty heavy fatigue, right, internal unrest, which is completely consistent, by the way, with the strains of a limit like that, of a system like that. Like, it was completely normal after defeats of that caliber for the system to start destabilizing, right? So the notion, he says, the notion that these years resemble some proto-Napoleonic collapse a la 1813-15 is respectively for the birds. Well, it seems to me that, first of all, nobody even alluded to that, and secondly, that if there is something devoid of any foundation, is this sort of weird elucubration of yours about a granitic power that your very scholarly sources you're invoking are literally telling you was in severe distress and actually notoriously went through pretty deep crisis in the following years. So if you cared about this so much, you're hotly invited to study much more and much greater depth and length, right? Topics that are also fundamentally very much known. I mean, it's, to me, the following history of the Kingdom of Sicily is very well known. I don't understand where we're going with this. Nobody even talked about the Napoleonic metaphor. So again, if you want to address somebody else, good luck with that. Here I'm doing history. I do not take this kind of nonsense from people that are frankly misinformed, probably not really competent in the field, given that, again, I also was green-lighted in my own work at some point by the same Grillo. Considering my type of publishing, the fact that I specialize in Holy Roman Imperial history, and I have a bond with the same, as much as I know the work of the same figure. So this seems to me really unnecessary, rude, and really inappropriate tirade that does not do any good, first of all, to yourself, nor to the channel that you're purportedly praising for his great depth, whatever, but you're somehow trying to sort of demonize with a completely fabricated straw man without having even listened to the most elementary and explicit information that I provided to actually back the very, in even a better way, the historical points that you're actually making that nobody has said anything against. Right? This is really not how you behave. Try to go to Grillo and claim this. Try to write him a letter and see what he answered you. Right? Probably he's not going to answer you telling you the truth, and not because it's you, because it's busy, but in general, right? You may want to appreciate that there is much more that you can do to improve your own knowledge in this subject matter and to be more consistent with the criticism of my videos that are pretty well researched, right? And start from very solid basis. He says, the situation at Frederick's death was not one of an exhausted imperial remnant confronting a victorious league amid the ruins of Stauffen power. Where is this actually stated in the video? Right? Where is the ruin of the Stauffen power? Given that I talked profusely about Conrad, I talked about Manfred. In the videos about Manfred, I routinely use the word attempted hegemonizing, an almost successful attempt at hegemonizing, at least southern central Italy. I literally publish topics on that. So I don't know what you're talking about. You do not seem to understand nor the content of the video, nor the boundaries of the video, nor the very fact that I literally address the very things that you're claiming that I didn't say pretty out loud without any misunderstanding possible about that. And that you're mounting up this pretty inconsistent, pseudo-intellectual attack at at work that is also the single best one on the subject currently existing on YouTube. Good luck at finding something better than that. So, and I appreciate your compliments about my work, but you can't be sort of divergently, bipolarly first saying that, I don't know, this is such a thoughtful video, and then, the guy says things that, nobody has even ever heard, including the people who watch my video. But you, by the way, this is also very interesting. How many times does it get? How is it possible that you actually commented on I remember you just for this very single thing of the last years of the orange stuff, and you also partially get wrong at years of distance, right? This sounds like obsessive attitude towards a specific topic. I don't think that it's either this is your moment to shine perceivedly because you think you know so much about the stuff. There is a difference. If you really are that knowledgeable, you do not need to do what you're doing right now, right? It's ridiculous. It's not that you don't have to do it to me. You don't have to do it for yourself, right? There is much better things you can do with your life. It says, several communes remain unconquered, and who said otherwise? Right? What is the time in Italian history in which every commune was Guelph or every commune was Ghibelline? You would say that the unconquered thing actually is the problem of Frederick II. It was meant to subdue northern Italy and failed. Do you want to take that into account? Right? Have you read what Grillo said? Right? These campaigns had gone pretty badly and the system was exhausted and they had to recover in order to do it. There wasn't even the attempt historically. You know that there wasn't an attempt to return to northern Italy. They were just Ghibelline in the north, and that's pretty much it. There were links with the south, but there wasn't much of a restoration, right, of any even direct control or whatever. You know it very well, right? If anything similar to that happened with the Guelphs. It happens with the Anjou. That also succeeded, by the way, because they had a much more light-handed approach to the matter. See what Frederick of Antioch did in Florence, right, for failing at controlling that. There is a pattern there. You can't unsee it. Right? Not things are the same. You can't simply balance things out just as you want, right? There's a pretty massive bedrock of historical and historiographical awareness regarding these topics, and you don't come to alter it as you wish. It says, several communes remain unconquered, certainly. Several communes. You want to say, hey, the Po Valley was not under the control of the south. This is truer than the other way around. If you want to make any case that also this control was merely an imperial control or a Sicilian control, right? Being aligned with an emperor that also can't factually directly control northern Italy as a land of conquest does not mean that this is much of just a 100% accomplishment of the fact that a kingdom of Sicily exists. These were local Ghibellines that were minding their own business and exploiting the situation as such, as much as the Guelphs were doing, as far as the papal cause was concerned. He says, but an equally real and far larger Hohenstaufen system still linked the intact Regno, Central Italian commands, Ghibelline city blocks, northern lordships, and Conrad's surviving German kingship. Where in my video or in any other video that I made or in any other historiographical work that you're aware of is this stated otherwise? Can you provide with any shred of evidence of where this is not discussed? Are you aware of the fact that I made tens of videos in which I discussed these very topics? Are you aware of how much work I made on the subject? Do you have the palest idea of what you're talking about? If you're a long-term follower, do you know this or you don't know this? Like, are you guessing? Are you hoping that, I don't know, this is what's your goal? Right, I'm making money with this video. What is your goal with writing this comment? Right, you may have worked to write it. I commend the devotion to it and everything, but all in all, where do you think you're going with this? Because as you've seen, you've caused the directly opposite reaction, which is also something very similar to what happened between Frederick II and the Lombard League, right? So it says, its armies suffered reverses without annihilation. Well, I don't know any power that, say, lost a battle, say, I don't know, it's like saying during the 100 Years' War, the French lost all those battles, so, I don't know, France had to disappear from the map. How does that work? Right? How does it even reconcile itself with a traditional juridical system of governance, of local customs, of the limits of pre-industrial society. How do you think this is supposed to be? How do you think there is even a person who is hypothesizing a different idea other than this? Where is in my video anything like this stated? Can you provide with any evidence of this? It says its officers were lost without administration ceasing. Its allies shifted without the coalition dissolving. And its enemies secured victories without imposing a settlement. Yes, because this did not depend on him only. You said it yourself. This was not a single man thing. You used that point, and this is exactly the point. The Ghibellines were not part of some sort of protrusion or extension of Sicilian power. The Ghibellines existed because they were Italians who had sided with imperial policy in the moment, as they had been doing in many ways for centuries. It's like, I mean, this happened all the time. I hope you're perfectly aware of the history of the Italian communes, commune by commune. If you're so passionate about this here, I hope that you have, it's impossible not to have in mind how this mechanism worked. How many videos did I make about individual communal governments history? How many, we talk about Parma, we talk about Bologna, we talk about Milan, we talk about Verona, we talk about Pisa, we talk about Siena, we talk about Florence, etc. We talk about Padua. That's pretty notorious. It's the history of the Italian communes, right? It worked like that, right? They didn't sustain themselves just because it was somebody else who was sustaining itself. They were the most traumatically overly developed parts of the world. They were opportunistically exploiting the alliance with the emperor. That was all king of Sicily, etc., as king of Italy as well. Otherwise, he could have not been an emperor to begin with. And so, again, what are we even talking about, right? Again, and then it says, the later destruction of the dynasty required Conrad's death, Manfred's reconstruction, and years of renewed papal struggle, Charles of Anjou, Benevent, and Tagliacozzo. And so I don't understand. Aside from the fact that this is a very these were truly universal axes. You at this point are moving away from Frederick to some sort of his projection throughout the entire imperial Ghibelline. It's true in an aspirational sense. There's no doubt that Conradin was the same blood of the Hohenstaufen, and coming back to take was rightfully theirs, right? But how again? Are you aware of the fact that I made entire videos on Tagliacozzo, on Montaperti? I also mention it again in the video. It's there. I often talk about Benevent. I made videos about Manfred. I talk about Conrad, right? Again, where are you going with this? Who are you attacking? This is the question you should pose to yourself. Who are you speaking to? Why do you think that this comment is relevant or useful, right? Where is the flow in my work? Where is anything that I made that is saying what you're literally saying, which I can understand it in 2.5 hours. One looks at a video, listens to a video and would say it differently. I understand that there is probably an emotional rush from the side of the viewer, especially as you commented immediately, when you're presented with an overload of information and you're familiar with it and you want to show how much you know and you're competent. But aside from the fact that you should take these videos quite gradually, and you should listen very carefully to what they're actually saying, hopefully with notes, studying them, etc. And then I'm sure you can find pretty many things to rightfully criticize. I don't think that my work is anywhere above criticism. I'm actually glad that you took the time for this because, again, I think this is going to be an interesting video for others to watch. And I understand that there is something there that probably tears you. But you are literally claiming something that is disproven by the very video that you're claiming. My video is saying the same things, in part, corrected, that you are saying from the direction that you're trying to claim that I am against, right? This is bad, right? And again, if you're aware of the rest of my work, you cannot misrepresent it, claim to a person who publishes about German and imperial history with West Point professors that wrote about Manfred, that wrote about the Ghibelline ideal, that studies the Italian communes, that studies the German interregnum for a living, right? And in pretending that throwing in a bunch of names of authors, by the way, say that the actual things that I'm saying, and that it is actually proving you wrong on the merit of, again, things were not going that well. I understand it's perfectly legitimate to say, look, this was not over. I understand that there are people who may think that, but my work is not conducive to it. That video in particular that triggered this reaction of yours is a video that literally stops before it actually expresses much of that judgment. Then one can have personal opinions, right? I think, again, the Hohenstaufen could win this wars, for example, as much as they could continue trying to impose their power later on successfully. So, I mean, Manfred is one of the single most central figures in the history of medieval Europe, and one of the very few people who made anything on him. How can you mistake my position on that matter if you are anywhere aware of my work? And you're making a rhetorical question, what is the revival of the last 2 years of Frederick, where your very best expert that you cite and that I literally quoted saying the opposite of what you're saying, in fact, shows you as definitely not a positive time. I mean, this is also not even conceptually controversial. I mean, it's obvious that things were going pretty badly at the time. Did you have any doubt about this? Like, are you trying to deny that? Because that would be also pretty disturbing. Like, the entire dimension of this ecumenic struggle, right? Do you think that when there are those blows, there are not aftershocks? Do you think that medieval societies are capable of simply fighting for decades without any fundamental collapse? Do you necessarily think that the Kingdom of Sicily was simply that efficient? What about the Lombard League? You didn't express fundamentally much about this because you basically listed the military events, but you spent a whole lot of time to defend the Ghibelline side, the Sicilian side, Imperial side, the Sicilian in particular. But you do not seem to provide any counter-alter to that. You're just saying, well, yeah, it may have been like this, but here there was this and that, and nobody even touched that topic. And when I did it literally in the direction that you're following. So to argue that I didn't even address the topic, or that I presented it, I don't know how, because you're not explaining here. Like, you didn't actually said you did this, right? You did very few things, and you stated very few phrases like that, and nothing precise here came out. It says that long afterlife is not the epilogue of a collapse completed in 1250. Where is in my video or in any other video that I made or any other known historiographical work the counter to that? Can you provide with any evidence of that? Right. It says, it is proof that no such collapse had yet occurred. Where in my video or in any other video or in any other known historiographical work is this stated otherwise? Can you provide any evidence of that? It says, Frederick died at the head of a still burgeoning Italian Sicilian regime whose structure had survived everything thrown against it and whose consolidation rather than rescue from ruin remained unfinished. Okay, so do you want me to read Grillo once again, that you cited as the proof of what you're claiming? Quote, at his death, which occurred on we know when, the emperor was witnessing the failure of his hegemonic design. The hope of forcing northern Italy to accept his rule had by now dissolved in the face of the tenacious resistance of the cities and the by then unsustainable weight of the wars unleashed to bend them. Good luck defending your position in front of the greatest expert on the subject that you yourself recognize as such. All right. So your theories, I don't know which one they are, also because they are fundamentally unsubstantiated. They do not make sense. They do not hold water. They're not sourced. They're not historiographically backed. They're not anything. They have nothing to do with my video, more importantly, which is the entire reason why I'm making this video and profiting off of it. It says the problem, so he says, so let's see the concluding remark. The problem running through this video, I'm afraid, is that it reads the whole equation in reverse. Okay, so is this the entire point? So this was what I did I read the whole equation in reverse. So basically, I read what Grillo says. I read what the most accomplished historiographer on the subject recognizedly states without any academic controversy, and on the basis on all pretty much everything that we know about Frederick II from 700 years ago. Well, I don't know. What do we want to do about this? Right? Believe me, I don't like to counterpunch, but you cannot claim that, my theories are BS when they are some of the best ones that you can easily find confirmed on the basis of the same literature that you look up to, right? I don't even need to tell you what I do for a living or who I am or what I'm publishing or whatever. Like, I can easily make that point to make you understand that if you really care about my work, you should know who I am, especially if you care about these topics. It just says, in the end, still a resolute Schwerpunkt follower, though, and always will be. The breadth, scope, and depth of the channel remain virtually unmatched on YouTube, and we're all the better for it. So this is extremely confusing. I mean, I really take this very at heart. Like, if you are truly genuine about this, I'm glad, right? Not because in all of this that, say, if I say that I work around these topics, I say it because we share a love for them. All right, I've never stated in 3,000 videos that because I'm a PhD in the subject, I must be right about anything. I've never thought about that. I actually think many PhDs are pretty bad, right? And I also appreciate the works of scholars like the ones you mentioned. Here we stuck to Grillo also because you sort of rightly put him at the center of the matter. But you have to be, in this sense, more consistent with the same thesis that you're purporting. Like, you can't come at me by saying, oh, this video says things that it doesn't say, that I am misleading, that I am saying things that are literally not saying, I'm not meaning. I made so much other work that says the opposite of what you're claiming. I don't understand even how, this could come out, right? I made this video exactly to show how I do not publish comments that people can read and be completely disoriented by, completely indirectly manipulated by. People self-manipulate themselves. It's not like you did something with an evil purpose. I don't think that you are doing this because you want to undermine my authority, or you are evidently saying, look, Schwerpunkt does good work. And I appreciate that. And so on the basis of that, why are you even saying this? My video didn't say the things you claimed, so there isn't much circling about it, right? I think we are both mature people. I think you're pretty young. I think you're in your early 20s, because the way you defend your own arguments is very similar to the ones I did back then. So I perfectly know what kind of anxiety there is to be a contrarian, to be somehow thinking maybe you don't know, again, what I do. I sound maybe just a regular guy on YouTube, and I really am at the end of the day. We're here talking about history, right? I responded to you. I hope that in spite of all sort of the firm attitude toward you, I think that sort of this repaid you in some way. That you will listen to this and you will say, well, you know what, maybe I will remain of my idea for some reason, because there's always a way on these big topics to say, oh, well, you can see this from different points of view. But there is also a point in history where you have to be concrete. And I perfectly understand through your mentality that you're not in the place where you're fully aware of how these mechanisms work. You have a solid evidential grasp. You know the basics of those times political events. You know about the various wars. You know about also these local theaters. I've read these other books. So I don't know who you are. I can be wrong in assuming that you're maybe just a university student at this moment. It's very likely, very likely. I rarely got mistaken ever about these things. But the point is that there is a better way to channel this historical enthusiasm by, for example, researching more in this. right? If you read all, for example, Grillo's works on the subject, he made really fantastic stuff of Manfred, for example. You mentioned some of the classics. You mentioned Abulafia. We're all aware of these works, right? If you look at these topics, these are the books that you have to read. It's like, I don't know, I want to study the Battle of Courtrai. I have to read Xavier Larry, even though I deeply disagree with his method because he doesn't reconstruct the battle, as many people that are talking about these battles. I specialize in that, as a matter of fact. Believe me, misunderstandings are very common, also at a very high scholarly level. I argued with Grillo at some point, and that's interesting, because internationally speaking, we do these things, right? It's great that in Europe we have this dialogue, that there is this awareness. It's our history. I mean, I always said that I come myself from the former lands of the empire, but I can't see this as merely like a matter of opinion. These are so structurally notorious subjects that you can't really get around them how you wish. I know that there is a tendency to that, but the more you know that, right, the more you are able to. And truly, Frederick II is also a field where you can always dig a lot in research. It's an evergreen field of research. One thinks that we do know everything. We do not know fully everything. At least for people who are very much into our archival work, there's always something to dig. It's also a very big system. So being able to read it is quite effective. But there are so many ways. Now the video is too long. I don't care about sort of digressing too much on this. But there are so many different ways to approach these subjects in a profitably critical way, right? I could, for example, counter your arguments under so many different aspects. Politically, how these countries were managed, how the individual stories went, or the military side of the story, right? There is a weight, a burden here. Creating a straw man, the Kingdom of Sicily did not collapse after Fossalta. Why should it even collapse? And why, at the same time, shouldn't this have been an important blow? And especially, more than that, what is that is even said in my video that doesn't align with this? Because that's the same point you're making. It's incredibly confusing. Incredibly confusing, believe me. And that's why I wanted to make a video about this, to read this stuff. I also would like to thank you, however, for, let's say, I didn't like the thing of, I don't know, this theory is garbage or this is misleading. I repaid you with that. I'm not offended per se, but I'm just telling you, like, we're talking history. We're not talking about me and you, all right? So it's a much more serious thing. The point is that this video, this comment was not aiming at... it was more aiming at expressing your opinion than undermining my authority. I discovered that there are lots of people out there that are simply insistent, and I've never really been, yet other reason why I'm making this video is that I've never really been historically criticized. The only people who criticize me are some sort of, emotionally unstable liberals of some sort, right? Very young, sort of disoriented, people without guidance, etc., that literally think that thinking something has any value, and that's their identity. And so if they meet someone who has a background like mine, they think, no, this is, I don't know, the guy does not post bibliography, so, I will not follow him. Like, we are, of course, in a time in which people are completely insane, right? Needless to say, we're aware of the fact that the neurocognitive faculties of the younger generations are literally degenerating at an unprecedented scale. The level of mental disturbs is something that has peaked as much as, say, the collapse in literacy levels, in level of general educational capacity, attention span, retention, or whatever. So I understand this is not blaming it on young people, but of course in an environment where the entire point is that you don't like authority at all. It's not like you don't like what authority says. You literally cannot afford to accept there is an authority. I'm incredibly unsurprised, telling the truth, that there are people who are starting to fabricate practically what I say to create false strawman arguments. So this comment was, again, not much trying to misrepresent me in particular. It was mostly probably failing and understanding what my video was about, which I was also pretty clear about, that there's no ambiguity in the video. There's not a moment in which I said, I'm hiding something. I said, it's clear as day. You can read it, you can watch it, whatever you want. But the point is this: let's not derail towards the nonsensical. Because even a person like this critic that has evidently some historical background and ambition, are interested, why is he even just an amateur? It doesn't matter. The guy has a potential, especially the younger he has. Let's not derail toward nonsense, right? And let's especially recognize structured evidence. Let's especially recognize that banally, like it was done today, if I'm accused of the collapse of the Holy Roman Empire because of a battle in northern Italy, and I made lots of videos about the Holy Roman Imperial power, the Hohenstaufen power after this, about Manfred, about Conradin, etc. The argument is defeated by itself. All right, this is unsustainable on a basic logical level. And one has to reflect on this. So, as I was saying before, I will not publish this comment because I already did it in the video, so that nobody will be able to read it just stumbling on my content, thinking that this is representative of what I'm doing. Because this is the point. Right? In my videos, I take things very seriously. If I want to talk about the coming back of Frederick in the last years of his rule that were afflicted by all these problems, as we've seen scholarship also pretty much tells us about, I will. Right? The Battle of Cingolo is very interesting. Very few people know it, but again, that's a page of history. It's worth reading. It's definitely showing Ghibelline faith, this loyalty to the empire, that there is all a mystique, a universality behind it, right? But let's not confuse this with this is you're thinking, I don't know, that pigs fly because I decide that. Like that's not history, and that's why I'm not going to recognize any of this. I'm not going to fit it, and I'm especially going to use this video also as an admonishment to anybody who thinks that they can make a criticism without substantially validating it, by substantially providing the necessary evidence to even base themselves on it. So that's the most important thing. For the rest, dialogue is always welcome. I was just saying the other day that we're not going to make specials because they're relatively encumbered, but sort of here we are, because this is a very good chance to make that. The video is too long. I will cut it here. I would always like to add more to avoid further misunderstanding. I think my message was really clear. I repeated myself over and over again during the video. For today, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, do a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.